film is very Western. It started in France, and documentary is very Western and very colonial in its genesis. Like how it started is to observe and to study the other. For the case of Yemen, we are constantly portrayed, especially in the UN reports, it's the worst humanitarian crisis. It's an unlivable place. Can you imagine reading that? While there are over 30 million people living there, what do you mean? My family lived there. What is unlivable? Since 2011, nothing is the same with me, my family, my country. The whole region is not the same, unfortunately. Like, it made me understand more that telling stories is really important.
Hi, I'm Moza, and this is the Ajial podcast. We talk about films, cinema, and storytelling in the Arab world and in the Middle East. Today we have with us an award-winning Yemeni filmmaker who captivates her audience and sparks conversations through telling stories that were untold about this region. She holds a bachelor degree in journalism and strategic communication from Northwestern University in Qatar and is a two-time TEDx speaker. Her film, In the Middle, earned her Most Promising Filmmaker Award at the Toronto Arab Film Festival in 2019, and she is currently working on her feature debut. Mariam Al-Dhubhani, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Moza.
Let's start by exploring how did you get your first inspiration for storytelling and for filmmaking?
It depends how far back do we go. I am a very visual person. This is how I learn. And I learned English actually by watching movies and trying not to read subtitles and then listening to songs. Before Google had them written for us, I would attempt to write them down using Oxford Dictionary, which doesn't make sense because they're slang. But I've always found these two mediums, the audiovisual mediums, very appealing to me in terms of discovering what is beyond the four walls of my home, for example. And fast forward to 2011, when I started working with a few of my friends amateurly. We're trying to make a short film about peace amidst chaos, amidst the uprising that was happening within the region, but also in Yemen. And I always gravitated towards media, but I didn't know how to pursue it because in Yemen we have limited resources and possibilities to do it professionally. So I was doing it as a hobby. And slowly but surely I realized that this is my way of communicating. I'm not able to speak my mind in many ways. I'm a bit socially awkward, although people don't believe that because I'm good at masking. But for me, film and music and this audiovisual mediums allow me to express myself and also discover other worlds beyond the world that I'm in.
Do you think what is more special to you from films? Is it like the visuals or is it the part of storytelling or both?
Both, because visuals alone, they can be very beautiful, but sometimes they don't really convey anything. And I don't like, and this is not nice to say because everything is good for a reason, but I don't like pointless things. Like it has to have a purpose for me personally. I do things because they need to be aesthetically pleasing and they need to convey a reason or something within that, not just beautiful for the sake of, oh, it looks nice, but then what's beyond that? But I think storytelling adds depth and creates more feel of a conversation or communication or something more than just you look at that thing, oh, it's nice, but then what?
Would you say that the purpose, like for your storytelling and like visual presentations, was ignited because of, let's say, political challenges, the Arab Spring? Like, how did that affect you?
The word spring is a bit difficult for me to use because it never sprung. I mean, until now, it didn't result in anything beautiful. And spring is usually related to flowers blooming. So it changed everything. Since 2011, nothing is the same with me, my family, my country. The whole region is not the same, unfortunately. Like how many years later, more than a decade later, and we're still in turmoil. And unfortunately, things keep escalating within like a dominoes effect that is not really nice. But it made me understand more that telling stories is really important from us, from within, instead of waiting for other people to parachute in and say whatever they think is enough or exotic or interesting at the moment. And it's just this constant superficial point of view of our region and our stories, but why don't we take over a little bit and make sure that, okay, you wanna share our stories, we will share ours as well, and then have these 2 points of view come across.
So like, was part of it wanting to, let's say, produce a counter narrative than a narrative that was, let's say, predominant about the region?
At the beginning, it wasn't. At the beginning, it was self-expression more. Like, this is my way of sharing. And later on, this necessity kind of hit me that, okay, you can push to the next level. You're expressing yourself, but you're expressing yourself for what? And what does that do? And what is the ripple effect from that?
What can you tell us about your first experience of trying to express yourself through movies? How was the experience of the first film for you?
Directing wise, I started from being in Doha in 2018. And it was a workshop with the Doha Film Institute that I hopped in very randomly in a way. I wanted to learn it, but I didn't know where to. And this opportunity came to be, and I applied. And I came in with an idea of just sharing what do we as Yemeni diaspora, not being at home, but still not feeling at ease, having this survival's guilt that I'm okay, I'm in a safe space, but my family and friends and everything I know are not. And I just wanted to share this experience of us being in a very safe space, but not feeling really fully at peace. And my mentor, who is still, like, I consider him my godfather in film, Reti Pan, he didn't like that idea. He was like, this is too generic. Like, what do you mean? You're just sharing your experience. This is not cinema. And I'm like, I don't know what cinema is. I don't have any cinema education. So help me. What does that mean? And he's like, no, you have a deeper story to tell. What is it? And he kept like pressuring me. And I felt it was very strange because I'm in a workshop with people I don't know. And suddenly I'm sharing one of the deepest things that I didn't even talk about with my mom or with my spouse. And slowly but surely, I started peeling off layers. Why am I afraid to confront these things, these burdens, these kind of mountains we carry with us? They get heavy, and if you don't tackle them, they just build up, and you're not able to live. It gets to that point. So I came to him with a red pouch that had my mama's wedding ring, basically, that she gave it to me before I left, and a few Polaroids of me and my husband and my kitties, but also a few Polaroids of our pregnancy loss that we had to face moving from Yemen to Doha mid-war. And I was like, this is what I have. This is kind of my struggle. What do I do with it? And it was a one-on-one meeting. And from then, he started peeling off layers, helping me. How do I tell this story? Literally sometimes hand-holding me, which I really, really appreciate. And that kind of created a deeper understanding to what storytelling is. And it's not just a way of commuting and understanding cultures, but it's a way of dealing with pain and a way of healing.
And would you say that the filmmaking process in itself and having the end product of the challenges that you went through helped you, let's say, get over it or process the emotions, process the feelings, the memories?
I don't think we ever get over our pain. Like, that helps us grow. In our complexities as people, we are not always happy. I know I come off always cheerful. I had this recently, a comment like that I'm crazy because I laugh a lot or I'm like smiling a lot. So I'm like, okay. And he was like, no, it's okay, because if you're not crazy or a little bit crazy, you're not a filmmaker. I'm like, okay, thank you for that. I don't know how to take it. But we're not always monodimensional. We're not always supposed to be even, monodimensional. We carry so much complexities within us, and that needs to be translated within our storytelling because it's human. Like, it's unnatural what we see in social media, one deficit or one dimension of people's very happy, perfect lives. It's not true. So that shouldn't be, imposed on us or on our storytelling. It's not getting over it, but it's being able to share that experience and learn from it, grow from it, and kind of heal from it, and continuously still healing from it. But it's something I couldn't speak about for 2 years, and it really hindered me. It didn't allow me to live or to be in a kind of functional relationship with my other half, you know, or to be able to call my mom and be honest with her, because I constantly call her and I'm happy because I don't want her to feel bad. I wasn't in a place to be anything but okay, because I'm in a safe place. I'm not allowed not to be okay, right? And I think it's something that many of us go through when we are moved to a place of blessing, or it seems to be a place of blessing to people. Otherwise, you're not grateful, or you're not fully living because you don't want to. It's not because something is holding you back. But without dwelling too much into that, it allowed me to connect with people who went through the same experience or similar experience. And at first, I didn't think I'll share the film with anybody. I was making it, and I didn't even tell Muhammad, my partner, that I was doing this film until the people were inside our dorms filming. And I was like, trust me, I need this.
You'll understand later.
You'll understand later. The material with me, I will edit, I will take care of everything. I need this. It's not going to be shown to anybody else. And then once we finished working on the film within the workshop, we were like, okay, yeah, if I took it to Ajal, why not? Let's see where that goes. And we're watching the film, we're both crying, obviously, because it's very traumatic for us. And I didn't know, the only thing I was praying, I was like, okay, please God, don't make it that we made the film and we're the only ones affected and it doesn't make sense to anybody else, because it's very specific. And that's the thing with storytelling. We go from the specific to the generic. And it shocked me how a specific struggle could connect with so many people. There was a large group of audiences who were Qatari Yemeni, or of Yemeni origin, and to them to hear anything about Yemen, it was the first film ever from Yemen to be shown there. And the film ended, and then strangers are flooding to hug you and console you. They felt it. And that's when my body shivered. I was like, okay, this is the power of storytelling. When something very specific touches so many people and you feel like something shifted, something changed. So we're making a wave, a movement. And from then I realized there is a scarcity of Yemeni stories. And how do we keep doing that? But not just my story, how about somebody else's story? Like for In the Middle, it's Ali's story. In other films I've done, it's somebody else's story who is sharing another aspect of what is happening. We're all different and we all need to be part of the conversation, because difference is beautiful. We shouldn't be monochromatic or one-colored. It's not real.
I especially find interesting your point about how storytelling is moving the personal to the public. Would you say that every successful story, or every story that would resonate with others needs to have at least some roots in a personal story?
Absolutely. And I've been following, for example, now the films that are making waves and resonating with a lot of people. And there are two films that are fantastic, and they're of Arab filmmakers, and they're making it now to the short list of the Oscars. And both of them are wonderful storytellers. One is Moroccan, her name is Asma Al-Mudir, and the other one is Four Daughters by Kawthar Ben Hania. She's a Tunisian filmmaker. But both of these stories, or at least for Asma, it's her personal story, personal struggle, that moves from the walls of her home literally to outside Morocco, dealing with a very traumatic tragedy that happened in the 80s that nobody talked about. And she managed to go from her own home, from her struggle with her grandma, who keeps telling people she's a journalist, or kept telling people she's a journalist, not a filmmaker, because a journalist is more prideful, but a filmmaker for her is it's not of prestige. And the film went to Cannes. She won Best Director. 13 years of work on a personal story that is now, being shortlisted to places where, of course, Oscars are not everything, but still to have this recognition and to go everywhere from a very, very specific story is amazing. And for the example of Four Daughters, it also deals with a couple of two of her older daughters going to Libya to be part of ISIS, which is very strange at the time, but it's still a traumatic thing that Tunisia goes through. The mother herself, the way she was covered within journalistic coverage in the media, she was monodimensional, and the whole story was very shallow. But what the director did throughout 5 years of working with the mother, her two daughters who are still with her, and then hiring actresses like Hind Sabri, it's trying to deal with that traumatic part of their lives that literally took away 2 of her daughters, but there is so much more before the 2 daughters left. And there's so much trauma that the mother has been through that led her to treat her daughters a certain way that is very maybe unkind, but people don't understand that because the mother had it rough, she passed on that toughness into her daughters. I don't want to like speak about the film too much, but if you got a chance, please watch them. These are wonderful stories. And the film ended up being part of the therapy for this family that were struggling to even, you know, have a voice. The 2 girls, they never spoke about their older sisters or were able to confront their mother for how she treated them. They never were able to speak to her. But in the film, they managed to have that in a soft setting, in a way where it was okay. And now they're touring with the film and they're sharing their experience with the audience from all around the world, creating more depth into us, into our region, into our stories that usually are so shallow in normal kind of coverage of journalism, unfortunately.
Those are like inspiring stories. I have to watch the movies. And I like noticed that in the 2 examples you mentioned and your story as well, it's all stories of Arab women sharing their struggles and different challenges. But there is also a common identity, even though diverse identity, there is a common let's say a cultural identity between them. So would you say that it would apply to you that your Arab identity, your Yemeni identity, your identity as a woman as well in the Arab world impacted how you tell your stories or what stories you choose to tell?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, for example, for Asma, struggling just to say that she's a journalist, for example, with me, I could never study media back home because my dad believed it's not a sustainable thing. We don't have proper media education. So usually young women or women who work in media, it's kind of it ends up being a beautiful face in front of a, you know, crane reading the news. Like there is no possibility for you to be multidimensional or to have, you know, to choose what you want to do. And that's not to be stereotypical about it, but this is the common understanding. And for my dad, it's like medicine, engineering, or you're wasting your life. And I feel it's something that is common within our region, that there is such a shame if your daughter or your wife or a female in your family works in the media. It's like out of all places, like why being a doctor is much more, you know, respected. Being an engineer is much more respected. And I struggled with that a little bit. Like I did went into a medical field. I studied pharmacy for some time back home, and then the war happened, so that stopped. So probably there's always good with the bad, yeah. So unfortunately, the war was horrible, but it really uprooted me from something I almost graduated from to come here and then study from the beginning at Northwestern and getting my degree in journalism. And even with that, I felt very restricted. Like within journalism, it's always tight deadlines and you need to know everything within short amount of time and you need to have a full story within short amount of time, but that's unrealistic and it doesn't allow you to give a full dimension of what really is happening. And I took that knowledge with me, but I gravitated back to storytelling that is filmmaking and perhaps for now more focused on documentaries because reality needs to be preserved and told in an interesting way that it creates our memory. I feel like in our region we don't have a collective memory that is ours. The most known films, especially in documentary, they're usually of the Orient, you know, from the other side coming to tell our stories, and Genesis of Yemen or the exotic Egypt or whatever. Lawrence of Arabia is not documentary, but also that kind of refers to how the world is depicted to the world, or our world is depicted to the world. But what is our collective memory from the 80s, from the 70s, from the 60s? We don't have much that you can look back and see who are the Qatari female filmmakers or even male filmmakers who did anything. So I feel like now and is the time for us to keep preserving what is our point of view, especially within the chaos that we're living in.
And I think especially entering the industry where we don't have a lot of history, we don't have a lot of legacy to stand on. How was that challenging to you? Like, it's amazing that someone had to do it, but what were the challenges you faced? Maybe like, was there enough representation? Were the mentors understanding of how different your stories are and how different they should be told? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And it depends where. Like, for example, within our region, I feel we have more understanding for each other, although our influence is very Western, because similarly to museums, film is very Western. It started in France, so the way, and documentary is very Western and very colonial in its genesis. Like, how it started is to observe and to study the other. And how do you study the other? You're a fly on the wall, or you're like, oh, interesting, they eat with their hands, or oh, interesting, like. But with just people, if we eat with our hands or with fork, it doesn't matter. You approach certain aspects of this specific culture. It needs to be with respect, not within your kind of projection. Oh, they're not civilized because they're not sitting like us, or they're not eating like us. And it became a library of observation from the other side, from outside within. And I feel it's great. We have some sort of images, because otherwise maybe we wouldn't have. But is that should it be the only image preserved, or can we kind of create the other half of this existing archives, if that makes sense? So if somebody wants to learn more about what's happening in let's say specifically in Yemen, and they might look into this ex-white filmmaker who made this ex-film, they would think that this is really what is happening, and they will not understand us as people, but it will be similarly to the positioning that filmmaker took. Whereas when you tell a story from a more humane aspect, like for example, what we tried to do with Ali, it was a very short amount of work on in the middle. It was literally 5 days of work. I wouldn't recommend it. Documentaries require more time, but I had restrictions being a student, having a grant that was limited in time, and access to Yemen while I'm studying in Doha, being afraid that I might be stuck and not be able to finish my degree. There were like so many things happening. Situation is unstable. So what we tried to do with Ali, who is a soldier, and usually soldiers are depicted in a way that you're a tool, you don't have your own brain, مسير مش مخير, you know, somebody is basically making you act certain way, but you don't have your own brain to think for yourself. And how we decided to start the short is by him talking about the wedding ring that he had from his lover, that his mom and nobody else knew about. And he says it's حق الشهيد, his friend that died, the martyr. But it's a lie. It was from the girl that he liked. And just to start with that, and him talking about the ring, and just, you know, having this facial expression of a lover. And then we understand he's a soldier, and why did he become a soldier? You already created that human connection, and you invest in him more. Because love is a universal language. Like, we all love, like, you know, have those feelings within us. How do you deploy these beautiful feelings within a storyline to tell something a bit grim and not, you know, he didn't choose to be a soldier. He's an engineer. He wanted to work as an engineer, but life, you know, had other forced him to choose something else. So being from the area, understanding him and him opening up to me allowed me to bring that out. But if it was someone who he could not connect with, he could not understand, they will not be able to show that facet or that part of him.
There's a lot of like cultural context that you can't teach to a foreigner that's coming for like a week or two, what you would know about it.
Exactly.
And that's like, let's say, the in between, not the lines, the shots, maybe, an understanding that even the audience would get. I want to go back to your background in journalism and the point you made about collective storytelling or trying to create a collective memory. Would you say that as a filmmaker, you want to convey individual stories, or similar to journalism, you want to have let's say, an overarching coverage of everything?
I think as storytellers, we have the ability to do whatever we want. It could be 1, it could be 4, it could be 5. But the more people, the more complex it gets, because you don't want to have a shallow view of one person, but you get a more deep view of another. So you have to always try to create a balance and not be unjust to one of the people who trust you to be part of the story you're telling. And that's extremely difficult. So when it comes to personal stories, you have full control and access because it's your own story. If it's your family part of it, then you have access to them if you live with them. But if it's somebody else's story, then you are limited within their work schedule. You need to understand that they have a life and they might pause that life from time to time to allow you, to invite you to be part of it. Keeping that in mind, keeping in mind their dignity, and understand that you don't want to hurt them within the narrative you're bringing, even if they are shown as antagonist and not the protagonist, you know, even though if there are parts of them that people will be like, oh, that I'm not going to like this person, or that their acts are not nice. But you understand, we all have that. You're somebody's hero in somebody's story and somebody's villain in their story, right? We're all complex. We're not everybody's cup of tea, and so are the people that we depict. But how do we do it in a way that we allow that complexity to show? And I'll go back to the 4 daughters example, because the mother, she is a very difficult character. She's a really difficult personality. But the way that the director was able to show her, even her, the mother herself, when she saw herself, and she was like, oh, I'm horrible. I know I look horrible and people will not like me. Once she saw herself, she's like, I'm complex. And see the change in even choosing of words. You are complex, and it's because XYZ happened to you. And we're all like that. We carry our history within what we do. And we should also allow that within our work with the people who trust us to do the work with.
And like, would you say that throughout your experience of telling your own story or telling other people's stories as well, did your idea of what an identity is change, or maybe what you think of as your identity change? Maybe since you do have access and interest in films in the Middle East as well, and the larger Arab world, and within like Yemen and other parts. So do you think you reached the collective identity you were trying to get to?
That's a very beautiful and difficult question to answer. I'll try to break it down a little bit. I love the concept of identity, and I think it's also ever evolving. We are constantly changing our understanding of identity as we grow. So us as children, we had certain understanding of who we are. As we grow, we become adults, it's a certain thing. In a university setting, it's a certain identity, because you're still trying to find out what is your passion, what do you want to do. After you graduate, it's the same thing. You're still trying to find your footing. And in film, I think it will never end. Like, we'll constantly keep discovering ourselves. For me, I was born, I was raised, all I know up until 2015 was Yemen. And I'm a mixed race. My mama is Russian, but I've never been to Russia. So I have that as part of me, but I don't know that part of me. Maybe one day I'll discover it and my identity will shift. But up until now, all I know is being within the region. All I know is being Yemeni, even though I might have features that are not fully, understood as Yemeni. Sometimes I get mixed as Syrian, as Lebanese, as so many other nationalities, which is so funny. But I feel like identity comes within what you understand it and what people project on you, and then within your work, because your work speaks for you even though if you're not here. So if the film is playing somewhere, people wonder who did it, right? And they have some understanding of that person. So I think it's, or for me at least, the best way is not to frame it, because that's very limiting, and just to keep it open and
Evolving.
to keep to keep evolving with it. I think that's a beautiful word
and
to
understanding the nuances, I'd say as well.
Exactly.
I want to touch on the Russia point again. When you said Russia, the first thing that came to my mind is like Russian literature. Like, there's a lot to discover and like explore there. So, and like in terms of film as well, you have Russian cinema, you have different world cinemas. Would you say that you stick to a specific style, or you have your own thing, or like how do you navigate like Arab cinemas and different world cinemas, American, French, Russian?
I love that question. I don't think anybody ever asked me this.
Really?
So thank you. This is very interesting. I'll tell you. So growing up within our household in Yemen, we only spoke Russian. We had Russian food, Russian TV.
Привет. That's the only word I know.
Perfect
And спасибо.
Пожалуйста. So for Mama, because we never managed to go, for her is what she passed on to us is the language and the passport. So basically I am Russian, but not really. I don't know how I feel about it. But everything we watched and kind of my cultural intake was more of the Russian side because of my mom, because In Russia, culture is kind of in everything they do, more than in Yemen, unfortunately, and that happened because of the changes in the region. We wouldn't really like that. Like Yemen before the span of Wahhabism was completely different. We were colorful, we were more into
and all
music
of the Arabian
and
Peninsula.
exactly. Yeah. So it was a different era and then a different era. But the one I was born into was very conservative, like music is haram and this is haram and that is haram. And my cultural intake and kind of appreciation came from my mom, and she was the first one who supported me always, even with my little endeavors of making a small short film in 2011, or me wanting to do it on the side while studying and working. But I feel like I still gravitated more towards my Yemeniness, maybe because that's all I knew, and having something from TV and from just the house wasn't enough. But maybe subconsciously it still stayed within me, trying to be worldly in a way that I feel being a mix allows me to fall in the cracks. So I could easily fit in with a lot of different people and different categories of people and different ways of thinking.
You're more fluid,
and I love that so much. And I feel like growing up I didn't appreciate it. I was like, I wish I was fully Yemeni because it's easier. It gets more complicated if you have more things to deal with. But now, looking back, I'm like, no, I feel like that mixed bit allows me to be fluid, and I fall within the cracks, and it allows me to bring more into my craft, or my attempt to tell stories that do not only resonate within the region or within just Yemen, but it's something that could go beyond and opens the conversation and the dialogue within no borders, like within the whole world.
And to go back to the point about creating and telling stories from areas of conflict, you hear all of this talk about, oh, we need people to see that we have happy lives even though we are struggling, and all of those things about how it's important to appreciate art and all of those things. But I think to some extent the situation, if it does not get better, how useful is film and how useful is art at that point? So like, did you have any thoughts about that while trying to do your film? Because I know it's a very long process. And like, did you think that, did it really have a purpose? Why do you still continue? And why do you go back to tell other people's stories as well from the same region?
Yeah, you know what immediately came to mind is the current situation with Gaza. And when you said it's important to show that we're still like having joys, and you see the journalists who are trying to portray their life, what are they showing? They're showing a meal that they're happy to share. They're showing little jokes, laughs, hugs, being happy that electricity came back for a few hours. It's important to stop the dehumanization that is happening. For the case of Yemen, we are constantly portrayed, especially in the UN reports, it's the worst humanitarian crisis. It's an unlivable place. Can you imagine reading that while there are over 30 million people living there? What do you mean? My family lived there. What is unlivable? It's unlivable because of the circumstances that we don't have control over. But imagine being someone in, say, Canada, Europe, or the US, have zero knowledge about this region or what is Yemen or what are Arabs or whatever besides what they see in Hollywood, and reading that bit of a report. Do you think they'll have any emotional connection? Unfortunately, what we hear is like, oh, it's another war in the Middle East, they probably deserve it. And that's literally quoted of somebody saying that on media and having no remorse, like it's a very normal thing. How could you say that? Like, we would never say that about the other part of the world. How do you allow yourself to lose your humanity when it comes to someone a little bit different than you, or you think that difference is too wide that you can't even empathize? And I feel like we should never stop telling our own stories and keep the joy within it, because even if that place is struggling, even if it's, you know, feels like an unlivable place for somebody from what's considered a first world country, it's livable for them. And it's these circumstances that are happening throughout history. It happened in Europe, it happened to you. Like, everybody went through wars, and unfortunately history repeats itself, but everything that falls is bound to get up. So this is not our forever story, right? This is for now, and this is how we are trying to deal with it. And if we don't have hope, then how are we going to even wake up the next day, right? If we take away from us the hope that is left, then what are we left with? That makes sense.
I think that's really touching. But do you think, like, as a filmmaker, there is a fine line between trying to encompass the whole person, disregarding in regards of the conflict that's happening, and let's say to some extent romanticizing the life that they live in. So how would you say you can have like a, I don't want to say happy medium, but somewhere in between?
It's very difficult, to be honest. Like I don't think I have an answer for that, and I feel like each case is different. So every time, every film and every story is different, and it requires special attention. It's not like the Hollywood formula, you know, this is a rom-com, so X plus Z plus happy ending, and this is the
And how
film.
the plot should go up and down.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and you know what's gonna happen, you know the ending. So it's not like that. So in documentary especially, and in authentic storytelling, in a way, you don't just apply the formula and that's it, because that's a business thinking, right? You want revenues, you want people to come and watch, and I understand that, because at the end of the day you want to pay the bills, you want to have a decent, well, it's more than decent life for some of these Hollywood producers. No shade, but yeah. But for independent filmmakers, for example, what we care about the most, or at least we try to care about the most, is how do we tell this story authentically, but with dignity, and also in a way that is not romanticizing or unreal. And at the same time, it's not something that you want to leave the theater or finish watching the film and you don't want to live anymore because it's so grim and dark. There is, I'm not going to say happy medium, but there is always importance to leave a little bit of hope, at least. I feel for my case, I know other filmmakers maybe love the devastation and people leaving and not being able to sleep at night. But for me, because the situation is already like that, I don't want to replicate it on camera in the same way. We need a bit of breather, a space to like sigh and be like, yes, it's hard, yes, it's difficult, and this is all there, and we acknowledge it. But is there a way out? Can we? What can this story thread lead to? And one film is not going to solve anything, obviously. So we need more storytelling, and we need storytelling to inspire something, to get up and do something, rather than, you know, feel depressed and not being able to leave your home for 3 days because you feel like the world is done and ended.
And would you say that your targeted audience that you want to inspire, or you want to make hopeful, would it be the world that doesn't know about what's happening, or the people that are living through it and trying to process what's happening and live in regards of what's happening?
I think both, because what social media did is made information very accessible, and we are constantly bombarded with so many images of disaster and death, and especially recently, I feel like the collective, it gets difficult. Even though if you're not in that environment, you stop wanting to interact with your screen, and you go to silly videos or try to watch something just to be able to detach. So in order to be able to ask people to come in and watch, to get out of their houses where they get access to Netflix and other places where they can watch other things, what would make audiences or people actually leave their home, go to a specific screening and watch that film, right? So you need to be able to kind of put some honey within what you're offering. One, because it will allow people to understand this cause and this story that is extremely important and doesn't get covered. Like, for example, in the case of Yemen, not many people know that it's been 9 years of war, and what is happening in Yemen now within the current situation that is happening with Gaza, we're a little bit remembered, but that doesn't really last for long, right? It goes down into a forgotten war. Unlike what's happening in Ukraine, it got more coverage, etc. Proximity, whatever the reasons are. Same with Sudan, with what's happening now. Not many people are talking about it, and it gets very heavy to stay within your couch, you know, and keep watching all of these difficult situations that you as an individual might not be able to do much more than maybe send, you know, $10 or donate, or I don't know, reshare a story, and you feel very helpless and restrained. So how do we transform this within a format of a documentary or a film, where people don't feel this devastation? They do understand that it's difficult, but it allows them space to have agency, which is sometimes taken away.
That's really touching. To go back to your point about revenues and big corporations that control like commercial films and things like that, you follow a different industry, you make independent films, and most of the filmmakers that do tell untold stories and documentaries and all of those things are independent filmmakers. And of course, it's tough. So how would you describe it, or what would you say to someone that's really enthusiastic about telling their stories through different mediums, films or other mediums, in our world today, in our region?
Be very patient. Be very patient. It's not an easy journey, and make sure that you have a job on the side or somebody who supports you, because and it's not something that I agree with, because I feel like telling stories and working in documentary or in film in general, it's a job. So you need to be able to sustain yourself, right? Otherwise, you will not continue. You reach a point where you're like, I want to start a family maybe, or settle down, or at least have a place to retire in the future. And how can you afford doing that if your job is unsustainable, or what you choose as a craft and an occupation is not sustainable? But a lot of patience is important, and documentaries are extremely hard. They're extremely, extremely difficult, more than any other format. And I do agree with many filmmakers who say that if you start in documentary, you can do whatever, because it's not like you have a script that you perfected and you're filming and you know the exact days of filming or pick up shots and you know how to edit them and you're done. It's constant writing and rewriting, and it's constant chaos that you're trying to contain, because it's life.
And you don't even know the ending to your own movie.
Exactly. And that's the most difficult question that I hear. Like, what do you envision the ending? I don't know. I'm still looking for it. It's still not there. It didn't come. And you're like, oh, when are you going to stop filming? I don't know. But it's good to have a vision of how we want to end it. However, especially for people who are just starting, and even with seasoned filmmakers, it gets difficult. You don't know when to stop rolling. You don't know what the conclusion of the story is, because life doesn't stop once the camera stops rolling, right? Once you're in the edit room, it doesn't mean that nothing else is happening. And how do you create this story that is, at the end of the day, becomes a chunk of this person's life, that is not his or her full story, but it's a chunk that is compelling enough to have to stand on its own in a way. But again, patience, and a lot of patience, and have a supporting community around you, even if it's like one person who's there to lift you up when it gets difficult, because it gets difficult throughout. It's like a bumpy road, but it's very rewarding. It's worth the patience and worth all the hardships, to be honest.
I think that's an amazing point to end with, a very high note. Thank you so much, Mariam. I love this.
Thank you, Hamza. Thank you for having me.